In the rolling plains of West Texas, 16-year-old Kaylee Cartwright was about to upend a dangerous pack of outlaws who thought they'd found the perfect target. When a local gang began harassing her family's ranch, trespassing on their land and threatening their livelihood, they believed they were dealing with just another small-town family easily scared into submission. What they failed to realize was that Kaylee's mother, Morgan Cartwright, was a battle-hardened U.S. Marine with more than a decade of global combat experience. Sunrise bathed the Cartwright Ranch in a warm, golden glow as Kaylee led her horse, Aspen, out of the barn to begin their daily routine. Her father, Bill, stood by the corral, brow creased with worry, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. It was once a peaceful stretch of land where neighbors helped neighbors, and the biggest excitement came during the annual county rodeo. But in the past few weeks, rumors of theft, vandalism, and menacing strangers had set everyone on edge. Kaylee thought she was ready for anything when she signed up for the rodeo that weekend. She'd been practicing barrel racing since she could walk, and she was determined to shine in front of her hometown crowd. But when the same gang that had been circling their ranch showed up at the arena, her world turned upside down. Their threats escalated beyond intimidation, plunging the Cartwrights into a deadly conflict that would test every ounce of Morgan's military training and Kaylee's own courage. What began as a typical summer rodeo would soon explode into a standoff that shook the entire county, pitting a fearless Marine mom and her devoted family against the lawless ambitions of a ruthless group of thugs. In the end, they would learn that no one underestimates a rancher's daughter and lives to tell the tale. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. Kaylee Cartwright woke before dawn, just as she did every single morning. At 16, she already moved about her family's ranch with a comfortable familiarity of someone twice her age. She threw on her scuffed boots, hand-me-downs from her older cousin, and pulled her long dark hair into a low ponytail. When her father, Bill Cartwright, heard her footsteps in the hallway, he grunted a greeting and handed her a steaming tin cup of coffee mixed with generous amounts of sugar and milk. Kaylee didn't need the coffee so much for alertness, she was plenty awake, but for the comforting ritual of shared morning quiet with her dad. Bill was a solid man, built like the ranch he had inherited from Kaylee's grandfather, broad-shouldered, dependable, and deeply rooted in tradition. Today, though, the lines across his brow looked deeper, and Kaylee knew he was worried about something more than the usual seasonal concerns. The big rodeo was just around the corner, and though Kaylee was excited, Bill had grown uneasy about certain rumors swirling around town. She didn't press him for details yet, but her stomach twisted at his unspoken tension. He cast a glance out the window, toward the corral where Kaylee's horse, Aspen, waited. "Looks like Aspen's ready for a workout," Bill said, sipping coffee. Kaylee nodded. "I'll make sure she's ready for tomorrow, Dad." Bill hesitated, mouth half open as if there was more to say. Instead, he squeezed her shoulder gently. Kaylee felt the usual pang of missing her mother at these times, though she never said it out loud. Morgan Cartwright, call sign Blaze, among her fellow Marines, had recently returned from an overseas tour. Since her discharge, she had spent most nights in the ranch's old bunkhouse, wanting a space to readjust to civilian life at her own pace. Kaylee's parents loved each other fiercely, but Morgan's transitions back home were never easy. Kaylee understood on some level that the stress of combat left shadows that took time to fade. At dawn, the ranch air was thick with the smell of hay and the promise of scorching summer heat. Kaylee walked outside, letting the screen door slap shut behind her. The desert horizon glowed with a warm pink hue, and the shapes of cacti and distant hills blurred into silhouettes under the rising sun. It had been a dry season. Dust whirled with every footstep. She made her way to Aspen, who nickered a greeting. The mare's coat shimmered golden in the early light. Kaylee ran a hand along Aspen's neck and whispered words of reassurance. They were a team, bonded by hours of barrel racing practice and quiet companionship. She heard another voice from behind the corral. Her mother, Morgan, stepped into view, wearing her usual dark jeans and a slightly faded t-shirt, her hair pulled back tight. She had that distinctly upright posture that shouted Marine with every step. A few thin scars marked her forearms, a testament to experiences she rarely discussed. Still, Kaylee felt a calm relief whenever her mother was near. Morgan approached Aspen with steady confidence, stroking the mare's muzzle. "Morning," Morgan said, looking Kaylee in the eye. "Morning, Mom," Kaylee replied softly. "You're up early." Morgan's lips twitched in a half-smile. "Slept well for once." The brightening sky reminded them both that the rodeo competition, the highlight of every summer, was just one day away. Kaylee felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nerves. This year was her first time riding in the amateur division, and she planned to barrel race like her life depended on it. She also wanted to prove that even though she was Bill and Morgan Cartwright's daughter, she'd earned her spot on that dusty arena floor. Morgan turned her gaze toward the dusty trail leading away from the ranch house. "I saw headlights last night, far out by the fence line." She crossed her arms. "Might have been folks from the neighboring ranch, but it was late." Kaylee frowned. "Should we be worried?" "I don't know yet," Morgan admitted, glancing at Kaylee's father, who stood in the yard scanning the horizon. "But let's keep an eye out." Bill said that some trouble's been brewing in town, something about local kids breaking into stables. Vandalism. Petty theft. But sometimes petty theft is a gateway to bigger trouble. Kaylee tried to dismiss the twist in her gut. They'd had small-time vandals out here before. Teenage pranks, mostly. But Morgan's expression was unreadable, the way it got when her instincts kicked in. She didn't scare easily, which made Kaylee's skin prickle. If Morgan was concerned, maybe there was real reason to worry. They set about preparing Aspen for a pre-rodeo warm-up. Kaylee saddled the mare while Morgan checked the girth and bridle straps methodically. Morgan's marine discipline extended to everything she did, from tying knots to cleaning rifles, from meal preparation to ranch chores. Nothing was done halfway. Kaylee used to roll her eyes at that discipline, but as she grew older, she realized how deeply it shaped her mother. It gave Morgan a sense of purpose, especially after her last deployment. By the time Kaylee mounted up, Bill had come over, his boots grinding in the dust. He nodded approvingly when Kaylee urged Aspen into a gentle trot around the corral. Watching them, Morgan's face softened into a rare expression of pride. For Kaylee, these moments felt like the entire world was in balance, the three of them working in quiet unity, the ranch behind them, the desert sunrise promising a bright future. Then, from the direction of the main road, an engine growled. An unfamiliar truck, battered and trailing a plume of dust, pulled to a stop at the ranch gate. Its occupants, two men in worn jeans, their ball caps pulled low over their eyes, didn't get out. They just sat there, scanning the yard like they were taking inventory. Kaylee's father turned to Morgan, who was already walking toward the gate. Her stride was decisive, but Kaylee sensed the hidden tension in the way her shoulders squared. Morgan reached the gate, arms crossed. "Can I help you?" The driver lifted his head, revealing a sun-baked face etched with a cunning smirk. "Just looking for the Cartwright Ranch. Y'all fix fences." Morgan's gaze flicked to their rusted vehicle, at the rifle rack in the back window. "We do a lot of things. Fence work sometimes." "You from around here?" The man chuckled. "Don't matter." For a moment, the air was electric. Morgan stared him down, and he stared right back. Bill, sensing the tension, joined Morgan at the gate. Then, as if nothing was amiss, the driver gunned the truck's engine and sped away in a cloud of dust, leaving Kaylee unsettled in the corral. She slowed Aspen to a walk, her heart thudding. This wasn't the usual neighborhood howdy. Something darker swirled in that brief encounter, something that made Morgan's jaw clench and Bill's brow not even deeper. Kaylee watched until the truck disappeared around a bend in the dirt road. She noticed that Morgan's fists had tightened at her sides. Her mother had always been protective, but after returning from her final tour, she became particularly sharp about reading potential threats, almost as if she expected them around every corner. With the men gone, Morgan looked back at Bill, exhaled, and then waved Kaylee over. "Stay on your toes, kiddo," Morgan said. She glanced up at the sky, the rising sun glinting off her eyes. This year's rodeo's going to be something else. Kaylee couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's event wasn't just going to be a fun local competition. There was a tension in the wind, whispering of trouble yet to come. And at that moment, Kaylee wondered if the stolen glances and half-spoken rumors around town were only the tip of something bigger, a threat that would soon entangle her whole family in ways she couldn't yet imagine. That afternoon, Kaylee washed down the trailer for Aspen, wiping every inch clean so her horse would be comfortable on the ride to the county fairgrounds, where the multi-day rodeo would be held. Her father had gone into town for supplies, leaving Morgan and Kaylee alone at the ranch. The oppressive midday heat made the metal trailer nearly too hot to touch in places, so she wore gloves, squinting through the sweat that trickled into her eyes. Morgan leaned against a fence post, arms folded. She was scanning the horizon again, as though waiting for another mysterious truck to appear. "You almost done?" she asked without shifting her gaze. Kaylee nodded and tossed the rag in a bucket. "As done as I'll ever be in this heat. Trailer's good to go." Morgan nodded. "All right, let's make sure your tack is stowed properly. You've got your gear for the barrel race? And for the roping event, too. That's all in the tack room." "I double-checked," Kaylee said. She tried to sound confident, but her nerves were mounting. This was her first official competition. She wanted to impress her parents, the local ranchers, and anyone else watching. They made their way into the barn. Morgan's gait was smooth but purposeful. Inside, Kaylee grabbed her saddle from a rack while Morgan lifted the bridle set to inspect it. The mother's discerning, I caught a frayed leather strap. She frowned, running her thumb along it. "We need to reinforce this. A snapped strap mid-run could cost you the race, or worse, get you or Aspen hurt." Kaylee exhaled. "I'll cut a new one from the spare leather. It'll only take a few minutes." Morgan nodded approval. She settled into a nearby bench while Kaylee spread out her repair materials on a small work table. The barn was cooler than outside, though it smelled heavily of hay and horse sweat. In the quiet, Kaylee dared to ask the question that had weighed on her mind. "Mom, these guys who drove up earlier, did you recognize them?" Morgan's eyes flicked toward her. "Never seen him before." She paused, pressing her lips tight. "I just don't like how they stared at our place. Like they were scoping it out." "Dad seemed worried about them too," Kaylee said, cutting a strip of leather. "You think they're just troublemakers or something more?" Morgan let out a slow breath. "Could be a local gang, or a group of folks who think they can run around intimidating ranchers. We'll stay alert. I've dealt with plenty worse." Kaylee's heart pinched at the casual mention of her mother's experiences. She didn't like to pry, but she knew Morgan had faced combat situations that most people couldn't fathom. That was part of why Morgan slept in the bunkhouse. It allowed her to pace, to jump at night terrors if they came, without disturbing Bill and Kaylee. She rarely talked about it, but Kaylee had overheard the low moans in the night when her mother's nightmares crept in. Once the bridle was mended, Morgan handed it back. "Good work. Functional and neat." She traced the new stitching. "I've seen Marines do worse jobs on their gear. Let's load up. The rodeo's officially starting in the morning, but we can check in early. The earlier we set up your stall, the more time we'll have to focus on the competition itself." Bill's old truck returned just as they finished loading Aspen. Dust coated the red paint, and Bill's face was flushed from the sun. "Got everything," he called, stepping out. "Looks like some folks are already setting up shop near the fairgrounds. Heard they're expecting record turnout this year." Morgan looked impressed. "That's good. More prize money up for grabs." Kaylee smiled, tension momentarily forgotten. She secured Aspen in the trailer, ensuring the mare had water for the ride. The entire ranch felt quietly energized, as if it knew that Kaylee's big chance was just a few hours away. They set off toward the fairgrounds in a small convoy, Bill in the lead with the horse trailer, Morgan and Kaylee following in the ranch's old Jeep. The road stretched long and dusty, telephone poles flickering by at steady intervals. Whenever they passed a neighbor's ranch, Kaylee glimpsed the flurry of activity. Other families loading horses, kids practicing roping in the yard, pickups piled high with bales of hay for stall bedding. The annual rodeo was the highlight of the summer, a unifying tradition for ranchers and their families from all around the county. Morgan kept one hand on the wheel and another drumming lightly on the dashboard. Kaylee couldn't help noticing how her mother glanced at the side mirror every so often, still on high alert. But soon the swirl of her mother's worry evaporated when they approached the fairgrounds. Flags fluttered at the main entrance, announcing the coming events. Vendors were already setting up funnel cake stands, barbecue pits, and stalls selling rodeo gear. The hustle and bustle felt like a second home to Kaylee. She'd been coming here to watch her father and others compete since she was little. Now it was her turn. Bill parked by a long row of trailers, and Kaylee and Morgan joined him to unload Aspen. The mare whinnied, ears twitching at the new sounds and smells. Other horses, excited crowds, the hum of music testing from the loudspeakers in the main arena. Kaylee led Aspen to her assigned stall in Barn C, a large structure that would soon be filled with the whinnies and stomps of dozens of competition horses. A tall, lanky ranch hand named Jess came over to help. Jess was about 19, wearing a sweat-stained cowboy hat and a big grin. "Need a hand," he offered. "Sure," Kaylee said, returning the smile. She liked Jess. He was friendly and good with the horses. While Bill checked in with the rodeo officials, Morgan supervised Kaylee's stall preparations. Together, they laid out fresh shavings and filled Aspen's water bucket. Kaylee gave the horse the quick brushing to settle her nerves. Other participants bustled around them, hauling tack, carrying feed, setting up portable chairs. The energy was palpable. Around dinner time, the three of them made their way to the row of food trucks lining the fairground's main path. Kaylee's stomach growled at the smell of frying meat and chili. She picked up a burger, while Morgan opted for a chicken taco. They sat on a wooden bench in the shade, away from the buzz of the crowd. It was a moment of normalcy, the family sharing a meal before the chaos of the upcoming day. Kaylee felt a surge of gratitude just being here with them. Then she noticed a small group gathered nearby, their voices raised in a mixture of laughter and sneering. Three young men, maybe early 20s, wore matching black shirts and battered cowboy hats. They seemed to be making a spectacle of themselves, loud cussing, throwing half-eaten food on the ground. Nearby families wrinkled their noses and gave them a wide berth. Kaylee caught Bill's eye. He scowled slightly. One of the men, a wiry fellow with a snake tattoo winding down his forearm, glanced over at Kaylee and stared for a second too long. The stare wasn't the usual friendly curiosity of a rodeo competitor. It was something else, something aggressive, with a hint of mocking. Kaylee stiffened and turned back to her burger, ignoring him. But she felt the weight of his gaze lingering. Morgan noticed, too. She set her taco down and studied them, assessing potential danger like she was back on patrol. Kaylee didn't want trouble on the eve of her big day, so she focused on finishing her meal quietly. Perhaps they were just looking for some rowdy fun. In a place where people let off steam, it wasn't unusual for a few troublemakers to crop up. As night fell, Kaylee and her parents found a relatively quiet spot to park. Some participants would sleep in their trailers or in tents around the fairgrounds. Kaylee had a small sleeping bag and blow-up mattress in the back of the Jeep. Morgan settled into the passenger seat, looking out at the star-strewn sky. Bill dozed in the driver's seat, hat pulled low over his face. Just as Kaylee began to drift off, she heard hushed voices and footsteps passing by. She cracked an eye open and saw a pair of boots near the trailer. The men from earlier? She couldn't be sure, but one had that same snake tattoo glowing in the pale light. A quiet metallic clink cut through the stillness. Heart pounding, Kaylee nudged Morgan, who woke instantly. They both peered out the window. There, under the glare of a distant floodlight, stood the three troublemakers. One of them jerked his head in the direction of Kaylee's trailer, smirking. Kaylee strained to hear, but the voices were too low. Then they moved on, strolling through the rows of trailers like they owned the place, occasionally swigging from cans of cheap beer. Morgan's expression was grim as she looked at Kaylee and whispered, "Go back to sleep. I'll keep watch." But Kaylee couldn't sleep. She lay there, listening to her mother's slow breathing and the distant braying of horses. Her mind swirled with unease about the coming day. If these men were no more than rowdy drunks, that'd be the end of it. But something about the way they stared at her set off alarm bells. She squeezed her eyes shut, determined to rest. Tomorrow morning, she had to be at her best. The memory of the men's harsh laughter, combined with the sight of that snake tattoo, seemed to cling to her like a burr. Even so, she eventually drifted off, the night's darkness swallowing the silhouettes of trouble that lurked at the edges of the fairgrounds. Morning light filtered through the Jeep's dusty windows, rousing Kaylee from a fitful sleep. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and saw Morgan already outside, walking the perimeter of their makeshift campsite. Bill was nowhere to be seen. He'd likely gone off for coffee or to check on Aspen. Kaylee slipped out of the Jeep and stretched her stiff limbs in the cool dawn air. The fairgrounds buzzed with anticipation, trailers rattling, horses neighing, and the sharp tang of sawdust and breakfast burritos in the air. Kaylee found Aspen in Barn C and gave her a quick once-over. The horse seemed calm, unconcerned by yesterday's events, content to munch on alfalfa. Bill patted his daughter on the shoulder and handed her a paper cup of hot chocolate. He knew she didn't care much for straight coffee in the mornings. "You ready, kiddo?" Bill asked, adjusting his hat. "They'll start calling the barrel racers soon." Kaylee swallowed hard. "I'm ready. Just nervous." "Being nervous is good," her father said. "Keeps you sharp." Morgan joined them, nodding in agreement. "Let's get your name checked off at the entry booth." At the main arena, participants lined up for the day's events: calf roping, steer wrestling, barrel racing, and more. The stands were already filling with spectators. A lively country tune crackled over the loudspeakers, amplifying the excitement. Kaylee led Aspen around the ring to warm up her muscles, trotting first, then loping in a gentle circle. The mare flicked her ears forward, eager. Kaylee overheard bits of chatter, folks praising each other's horses, exchanging tips on the best saddles, complaining about the rising cost of feed. In the background, rodeo clowns tested their gag routines in the ring, drawing laughter from kids in the stands. Everything felt both chaotic and thrilling. Soon the announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the junior barrel racing competition. Let's welcome our riders with a big round of applause." Cheers erupted, and Kaylee's pulse spiked. She guided Aspen to the waiting area near the arena's entrance. The official in a crisp, embroidered shirt ran down a clipboard list, calling riders one by one. A couple of teenage girls in colorful sequined shirts waved at the crowd, soaking up the moment. Kaylee felt a surge of camaraderie and competitiveness. She didn't have sequins, but she had grit. "Kaylee Cartwright, you're up." Her stomach fluttered. She gave her parents a final wave, then nudged Aspen into the arena. Dust kicked up around a horse's hooves, and Kaylee took a slow, steady breath. The barrels were set in a triangular formation. She positioned Aspen at the starting line, eyes locked on the first barrel. The moment the flag dropped, she urged Aspen forward. The mare bolted, hoofs pounding the dirt in a blur of power. They circled the first barrel, leaning precariously, Kaylee's heart in her throat. She kept her eyes up and hands light, guiding Aspen around the second barrel. Cheers and whistles spurred her on. With the final barrel ahead, Kaylee felt a jolt of excitement. This run was clean, no knocking barrels. She hooped as they rounded the last turn. Then they sprinted full tilt down the home stretch. Crossing the finish line, Kaylee heard the announcer shout, "Great run from Kaylee Cartwright. Time is..." The rest was lost in the roar of the crowd. Adrenaline flooded her system. She gently pulled Aspen to a stop, letting the dust settle. Her father waved proudly from the fence, and Morgan stood right next to him, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. Kaylee walked Aspen in a cool-down circle, waiting for her official time. It appeared on the electronic scoreboard, 16.02 seconds. That put her squarely in contention for the top spots in the junior division. She felt a surge of triumph. Whatever those men had done to unnerve her last night, it hadn't shaken her enough to ruin her focus. She led Aspen back to the barn, heart still pounding. Nearby riders nodded congratulations. Kaylee beamed, cheeks hot from the rush. She was about to grab a bottle of water when she heard a harsh snicker behind her. So, the kid can ride. Kaylee turned to see the three troublemakers from the night before. Snake Tattoo was in front, leaning against the stall door. His two buddies loomed behind him. Snake Tattoo looked at her with a lazy grin. That was a decent run. But don't get cocky. This here rodeo's just begun. Kaylee's mouth went dry. She bristled. Who were these guys? They looked older than the typical junior competitors. Thanks. I guess she managed, keeping her tone polite but distant. Snake Tattoo stepped forward. Name's Dwayne, he said, tipping his hat sarcastically. You're Bill Cartwright's kid, right? Heard you got a big ranch outside of town. Kaylee shrugged, trying not to show her discomfort. We have a ranch, yes. Dwayne let out a short laugh. So you think you're top dog, huh? I see how your old man parades you around. Bet you think you're real special. Something about his tone set Kaylee on edge. She lifted her chin. Look, I'm just here to race. My dad's proud of me, that's all. One of Dwayne's buddies, a broad-shouldered guy with a shaved head, snorted. Daddy's little princess. Probably used to getting whatever she wants. They were itching for a fight, or at least to rattle her. Kaylee fought the urge to snap back. She recalled her mother's lessons. Escalate only if necessary. But fear flickered inside her. She was alone in this part of the barn, her parents likely out near the stands or the concession area. Excuse me, she said, trying to walk away. But Dwayne sidestepped to block her path. Well, no need to run off. We're just saying hi, he drawled, feigning innocence. By the way, I hear there's some big prize money in the roping event, too. You and that one? Kaylee frowned. Yes, tomorrow. Good, Dwayne said. We'll be watching. He shot her a malicious grin, then backed off, letting her pass. Kaylee's heart thumped hard, and she hurried around a corner, stumbling straight into her mother. Morgan's jaw was set, fury etched across her face. She'd witnessed enough of the exchange to understand what was happening. Morgan strode forward, confrontation in her stance. Hey, she barked at Dwayne and his buddies. What's going on here? Dwayne blinked as if he recognized Morgan from somewhere. Maybe from the front gate of the ranch. He held his hands up in mock surrender. Nothing, ma'am. Just chatting with your little girl. Morgan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Kaylee saw the hardened Marine flicker through her. Stay away from my daughter, Morgan warned, or we'll have a real problem. Dwayne only smirked, stepping away. Sure thing, he drawled, glancing over his shoulder at Kaylee. Wouldn't want to upset Mama Bear. He and his friends walked off, leaving Morgan and Kaylee standing by the stall. Kaylee's hands trembled slightly, a flood of relief and anger swirling in her chest. She wanted to shout a dozen curses at them, but Morgan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. You all right? Morgan asked quietly. Kaylee nodded, swallowing hard. They were just being jerks. Trying to scare me, I think. Morgan's jaw tightened. They'd better not try it again. Then she took a breath, softening. Come on, let's get you somewhere with more people. We don't want to give them another chance to corner you alone. They walked toward the main arena again, Kaylee's mind spinning. Her mother had just stepped in, shutting down the harassment with a single glare. Yet Kaylee knew it might not end there. Everything about Dwayne and his buddies screamed that they weren't done. And with the rodeo in full swing, the days ahead would force them all into close proximity. Kaylee found Bill near the scoreboard. He noticed her pale expression and tensed. "What's going on?" Morgan explained the confrontation in clipped, precise sentences. Bill cursed under his breath. "I saw those boys earlier," he said. "Looked like trouble. Heard they're from some ranch just south of here, known for rowdy business." He squeezed Kaylee's arm. "You did good ignoring them, baby girl." Kaylee took a shaky breath. It's not fair they can ruin this for me." Morgan set her jaw. "They're not ruining anything. You did great today. You'll do great tomorrow. They're trying to get under your skin. Don't let them." The announcer's voice broke through the speakers again, calling for the next event. Families bustled around, oblivious to the tension roiling inside Kaylee. She looked at her parents, nodded, and forced her focus back to Aspen, the stalls, her upcoming events. But in the back of her mind, she felt that uneasy chill. Dwayne's smirk replayed in her mind like a bad refrain. The day wore on, filled with the usual excitement of a rodeo. Kaylee watched some calf roping, chatted with a few other junior riders, and took Aspen for a walk around the grounds to keep the mare relaxed. Now and then, Kaylee spotted Dwayne or one of his buddies loitering by a stall or leaning on a fence. Each time, their eyes followed her, as if measuring her reaction. Kaylee kept her chin high, but she felt the tension coil tight in her chest. By the time evening fell, she was exhausted, both from the physical demands of riding and from the emotional stress of being hounded by strangers. Her parents suggested they head into town for a quick dinner at a small diner to get away from the fairground hustle. Kaylee agreed, relieved at the chance to distance herself from the threat for a bit. The three of them climbed into Bill's truck. As the rodeo lights receded in the rearview mirror, Kaylee sighed, shoulders slumping. Morgan reached over from the passenger seat and squeezed Kaylee's hand gently. A silent reassurance passed between them. But as they left the fairgrounds, Kaylee couldn't help noticing a pair of headlights appearing behind them on the rural highway. Some old, battered pickup, following at a distance. Her heart thudded again, the memory of the men's sneers still fresh. She turned to Morgan, who met her gaze in the side mirror. Morgan's jaw clenched slightly, and she nodded. Yes, she saw it too. Was it Dwayne and his friends? Probably. The road stretched out, leading them to town, but Kaylee couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. And she was right. Bill pulled into the parking lot of a little roadside diner that had been around since Kaylee's grandparents were young. Its neon sign flickered a perpetual open, casting garish pink and green reflections on the gravel. The battered truck that had been tailing them continued past, not stopping, but Kaylee still felt a tight knot in her stomach. They stepped inside, with a smell of burgers, fries, and fresh coffee mixed with the gentle hum of a fluorescent light. A couple of regulars perched on stools at the counter. The waitress, Dolores, greeted them with a warm smile. "Cartwrights. Haven't seen you folks in a while. What'll it be?" "3 burgers with the works," Bill said, tipping his hat. "And keep the iced tea coming." They took a booth near the window, Kaylee sliding in next to Morgan. Outside, the sun was a fiery red disk sinking into the desert horizon. Kaylee couldn't help glancing at every passing car, worried about the battered pickup. Yet each vehicle was different, none had that same shape or exhaust rattle. She tried to steady her breathing. Morgan set her elbows on the table, leaning forward. "Look, you did good today," she said softly, addressing Kaylee. "Tomorrow you've got roping in the morning. Then the second round of barrel racing in the afternoon. Stick to your routine. Don't let these boys intimidate you. If they step out of line again, your dad and I will handle it." Bill nodded, though he looked troubled. "We'll keep a close eye. I'm going to talk to a couple of the rodeo officials, too. They might not be able to do much unless the boys break a rule or commit an actual crime, but at least we'll put them on notice." Kaylee fiddled with the sugar packet on the table. "I wish they'd just go away." This is supposed to be my big weekend. Morgan's hand moved to Kaylee's back, a comforting rub. They won't keep you from winning. Dolores came by with their burgers and a pitcher of iced tea. Kaylee's appetite had waned, but she forced herself to eat a few bites, mindful that she needed the energy. Her parents tried to lighten the mood, discussing the next season's ranch work and the condition of the old fence line. But Kaylee noticed how Morgan's eyes flicked to the window, scanning the parking lot every so often, and Bill's conversation felt forced. After dinner, they paid their bill and stepped back outside. The sky was fully dark now, the stars unfolding above them in a breathtaking panorama. Bill took a quick, cautious look around before guiding them to the truck. The battered pickup was nowhere in sight. On the return drive, the hum of the engine lulled Kaylee into a haze, but she remained watchful. Luckily, no suspicious vehicles followed them this time. When they arrived at the fairgrounds, Bill found a spot closer to the main barn. More traffic, more lights. That gave Kaylee some comfort. The night carried on with typical rodeo festivities. A live band played near the vendor stalls, couples line danced, and kids raced around with cotton candy. Kaylee enjoyed a few moments with friends she'd met through 4-H, discussing their horses and comparing notes on the day's runs. She even laughed a bit, letting the day's tension slip away. Eventually, Morgan suggested they turn in early. Kaylee had a big day tomorrow, and they all needed rest. They checked on Aspen once more. The mare was content, munching away. Kaylee gave her a pat on the nose, inhaling the horse's comforting scent. They headed to the truck to set up sleeping arrangements again. Kaylee curled into her sleeping bag, Bill in the driver's seat, Morgan in the passenger seat, seat reclined just enough to doze. The fairground lights glowed in the distance, and faint music drifted on the breeze. Before long, Kaylee fell asleep. In the middle of the night, she jolted awake at a thud against the truck window. Heart pounding, she sat upright, disoriented. Morgan was already stirring, her marine reflexes snapping her to alertness. Bill rubbed the sleep from his eyes, muttering, "What the?" Peering out the window, they saw two shadowy figures darting away. One was tall and skinny, the other broad-shouldered. The words, "Get lost, princess," were scrawled in white paint across the side of their trailer. Kaylee's stomach dropped. Morgan flung open the passenger door. "Hey, you punks." She sprinted after them, but they disappeared behind a row of parked pickups. Kaylee scrambled out the back door, Bill following. They found Morgan scanning the area, fists clenched. Kaylee's eyes moved to the vandalized trailer. Anger flared hot and bright. "They painted on our trailer," she asked, voice cracking. Bill cursed under his breath. "That's it. I'm calling the sheriff." But the fairgrounds were big, and the local sheriff's department already had its hands full with the rodeo crowd. By the time a deputy arrived, the culprits were long gone, and there were no witnesses. Dwayne and his buddies were nowhere to be found. Kaylee felt sick with rage and fear. She had to compete in a few hours, and now her trailer was defaced. "You can try washing it off," said Deputy Harris, scratching his head beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "But that paint looks pretty fresh. Might come off with some solvent if you're lucky." Morgan stood nearby, tension radiating off her in waves. "I'll handle it," she said, voice clipped. "But they need to be held responsible. This can't keep happening." The deputy sighed. "I'll make a report, ma'am." "You got any names, descriptions?" Bill described Dwayne and his buddies in detail. Kaylee chimed in with specifics. The deputy jotted notes on a small pad. "We'll see if we can find him. Keep an eye out. If they do anything else, call 911. With that, the deputy ambled off. It felt useless, but Kaylee tried not to show her frustration. She helped Morgan and Bill scrape away at the paint with a rag and a bottle of solvent they'd borrowed from a neighboring rancher. The word smeared into a milky mess, and although some paint still clung to the trailer, they managed to hide most of the graffiti. By the time they finished, dawn was on the horizon. Morgan's gaze was cold fury. She turned to Kaylee, voice tight. "You go get ready for your roping event. Don't let this mess distract you." That's exactly what they want. Kaylee nodded, determination burning in her chest. She wouldn't let these thugs ruin her rodeo. She would ride, rope, and do her best, no matter their attempts to bully her. As Kaylee got Aspen ready, she couldn't help the roiling churn in her gut. She feared what might happen next. Still, she steeled herself, focusing on her roping skills. This was her event to lose or win. When she entered the roping arena, the early morning crowd was already energized. Steers bellowed in the holding pens. Ropes swung in practiced arcs overhead. Kaylee took a deep breath, urging Aspen into position. The gate flung open, the steer bolted, and Kaylee launched into pursuit. She swung the rope, eyes fixed on the target. Her muscles remembered the hours of practice in the yard at home, the countless times she'd honed her technique. The loop sailed true, settling around the steer's horns. Kaylee jerked the rope tight. Aspen skidded to a halt, hoofs kicking dust. A collective cheer rippled through the stands. She had it. She'd roped clean, and her time was good, damn good. For a moment, euphoria replaced the tension of the night's events. Unashamed excitement bubbled in her chest. She patted Aspen's neck, her grin stretching ear to ear. Standing by the fence, Bill hooped and Morgan gave a thumbs up. Kaylee's heart soared. But as she rode out of the ring, her eyes flicked to the stands. Seated in a high row, wearing black shirts and leaning forward with taunting grins, were Dwayne and his buddies. One of them made a slow clap, the kind meant to mock, not praise. Another flashed a toothy smile that didn't reach his eyes. Kaylee's stomach twisted. Yes, she had a great run, but they were still there, watching, ready to strike again. She returned the rope to the tack station, dismounted, and led Aspen back to the stall. Morgan and Bill rushed over, excitement bright on their faces. "You nailed it," Bill said, pulling her into a bear hug. "That might place you in the top 3. Morgan nodded approval. "Proud of you, Kaylee." Then she added quietly, "But keep your guard up." Kaylee swallowed. They were watching me from the stands. A spark of anger flared in Morgan's eyes, but she kept her cool. "They can watch all they want. They won't break us." Their voices were drowned out by the cheers of another roper in the ring. Kaylee exhaled, letting the tension slip for just a moment. She'd done what she came here to do, compete at her best. She'd face whatever came next with her mother and father at her side. Yet a thin edge of fear remained. This quiet was only a lull, she sensed, before the trouble truly escalated. And by the way Morgan's hand hovered protectively near Kaylee's shoulder, she suspected her mother felt it too. Kaylee spent the next couple of hours resting in the barn shade, letting Aspen recover as well. The horse needed hydration and a break before the afternoon's second round of barrel racing. Meanwhile, Bill chatted with old friends who ran ranches farther up north, discussing livestock prices and weather patterns. Morgan remained slightly apart, scanning the crowds, hands never straying far from her hips as though she still wore her sidearm. After a quick lunch, Kaylee prepped Aspen for the barrel race. She mounted up, her competition number pinned to her shirt, and joined the line of riders near the arena entrance. A wave of anxiety washed over her, memories of the vandalized trailer and last night's chase swirling in her mind. But she inhaled, centered herself, and focused on the immediate challenge, the pattern of barrels, her horse's rhythm, her grip on the reins. The moment the announcer called her name, she guided Aspen into the arena at a gallop. The crowd's cheers became a distant roar. Kaylee's universe shrank to the horse beneath her and the barrels in front of her. She leaned into the first turn, her inside leg pressing lightly against Aspen's flank. Dust billowed, and they whipped around the barrel with inches to spare. The second turn felt even tighter, adrenaline spiking. At the third, her boot nearly grazed the metal as Aspen pivoted. Then came the final sprint, hoofs pounding the earth, Kaylee's teeth clenched in fierce determination. She crossed the timer in a blur, nearly missing the announcer's final call, That's a clean run for Kaylee Cartwright. The scoreboard flashed a time half a second better than her first day's run. Her heart soared. If the rest of the field struggled or posted slower times, she might be in contention for a top finish in the junior division. But her exhilaration ebbed when she saw a small commotion near the stands. There, leaning against the railing, was Dwayne, his black shirt half unbuttoned in the afternoon heat. He didn't clap or cheer. Instead, he stared at Kaylee with narrowed eyes, a predatory smirk tugging at his lips. Kaylee felt an icy spike of anger. Even if she won the competition, how could she truly celebrate under the shadow of his intimidation? She guided Aspen to a slow trot as she left the arena, dismounting in a roped-off area. Bill rushed up with a grin, but one look at Kaylee's face wiped it away. "What's wrong?" She nodded toward the stands where Dwayne lingered. Bill's mouth tightened. "Don't worry about him," he said softly. "He's a coward. Probably too afraid to make a move in front of all these folks." Morgan was at Kaylee's side a moment later. "Great run," she said, placing a hand on Kaylee's shoulder. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked up at Dwayne. "We'll stick close until the winners are announced." They walked Aspen back to the stalls. Kaylee's hands trembled slightly, still fueled by the adrenaline. She gave the horse a rub-down, loosening the girth and checking for any signs of stress. Morgan kept watch. Bill stepped away briefly to speak with some rodeo staff about last night's vandalism incident, hoping for additional security or at least a stronger presence near the barns. After an hour or so, the judges finished tallying the day's times. A buzz crackled through the loudspeakers. "Will all junior barrel racing competitors please come to the main stage for award announcements?" Kaylee's throat went dry. She'd been trying to brace herself for either triumph or disappointment. She wiped her hands on her jeans and walked with Morgan to the stage set up near the edge of the arena. Family and friends of the riders gathered below, forming a cheering crowd. The announcer, a tall man in a blue Western shirt, stepped forward with a microphone. "We saw some incredible rides today, folks. These young riders have shown true heart and skill. Now let's announce our top 3. Kaylee's heart thundered. She forced a grin, scanning the faces in the audience. Bill stood near the front, giving her a thumbs up. Morgan offered a nod of encouragement, arms folded. Then Kaylee spotted Dwayne in the crowd, leaning against a pillar, arms crossed with that same smug look. She forced herself to ignore him. In third place, the announcer boomed with a combined time of 33.21 seconds is Sarah Henderson. A petite girl in a fringed vest stepped forward, beaming as she accepted her ribbon. In second place, with a combined time of 32.89 seconds, Kaylee Cartwright. Her lungs felt as if they forgot how to breathe. The crowd cheered and clapped as Kaylee made her way forward. Morgan's applause was sharp, and Bill whistled. Kaylee accepted the shiny red ribbon, her cheeks burning with pride. She was second place overall in her first official competition. As she stepped back in line, she caught sight of Dwayne shaking his head, almost in amusement. She forced herself to focus on the moment. The announcer declared the first place winner, a girl who had a fractionally faster run. Kaylee shook her hand, congratulating her sincerely. Despite the menacing presence in the crowd, Kaylee was flooded with a sense of accomplishment. After the ceremony, Kaylee descended from the stage. Bill enveloped her in a hug. "So proud of you, baby girl." Morgan squeezed her shoulder. "You rode like a champ." Still clutching her ribbon, Kaylee grinned. "I really did it." Nearby, the winners posed for photos. Kaylee joined them briefly, but her attention kept drifting. Through the swirling crowd, she noticed Dwayne, who signaled for his buddies to join him. Snake Tattoo sneered, saying something Kaylee couldn't hear above the noise. The group walked away, heads bent together. Morgan stepped in close. "Let's stay around, people, in plain view. We'll celebrate with a nice meal after the rodeo closes for the day. Your dad and I want to stick around for the final events. Keep an eye on the barn." Kaylee nodded, exhaling. She felt safe with her parents, but the undercurrent of tension remained. The day's events wound down, culminating in bull riding for the pros as twilight fell. Kaylee and her parents found seats in the stands, enjoying the spectacle of expert riders testing their mettle against monstrous bulls. For a while, Kaylee forgot the threat, enraptured by the bravery unfolding in the arena. But later that night, as the crowds dispersed and vendors closed up shop, Kaylee's anxiety returned. They collected Aspen, making sure she was secure in her stall before heading back to the truck. Dwayne and his gang were nowhere in sight. Possibly, they had gone to a bar in town or turned in early. Morgan gestured toward the carnival area, which was still alive with lights and music. We should pass through the carnival side. More people there. They wandered past bright neon rides spinning against the starry sky, the screams of thrill-seekers mixing with laughter and country music. Kaylee felt like a normal teenager for a fleeting moment. Bill bought them cotton candy. Morgan even smiled when Kaylee offered her a bite of the sugary fluff. It tasted like carefree childhood. Then Kaylee spotted them. Dwayne and his two buddies, weaving through the carnival crowd, half-empty beer bottles in hand. Instinctively, Kaylee froze. Morgan noticed and tensed. Bill put a protective arm around Kaylee. Dwayne's eyes locked onto Kaylee's for an instant. She saw it in his face. Alcohol, aggression, and a simmering resentment. He nudged Snake Tattoo, who followed his gaze. Kaylee's mouth went dry, but she kept her composure, standing tall between her parents. For a moment, it seemed like the men might walk away. Then Dwayne muttered something to his friends and peeled off from the crowd, heading straight toward them. The carnival lights reflected red and green on his weathered features. Morgan took a step forward, her posture screaming readiness. Bill stiffened beside her. Kaylee's heart fluttered, but she held her ground. "Well, if it isn't the Star Rider," Dwayne drawled, gesturing mockingly at Kaylee. "Second place, that's cute." Morgan glared. "Back off." Dwayne stopped just short of Bill's outstretched arm. "Easy, ma'am," he said, raising his hands in feigned innocence. "We're just saying congratulations. The local paper might do a nice article on y'all. Rancher's daughter takes second at County Rodeo. Bet that'll sell some copies." Kaylee tried to breathe. "Is there a problem?" Dwayne's eyes flicked to her. "You've got a nice future, kid. Would be a shame if someone messed it up." He flicked the brim of her hat. "This is a dangerous sport, after all." Bill's face turned crimson. "All right, that's enough." He stepped in, grabbing Dwayne's wrist before it could connect with Kaylee's hat again. The tension was a live wire. Dwayne's buddy with the shaved head spat on the ground. "Let go." Morgan's voice came out low and lethal. "Make him." For a moment, time seemed suspended. Kaylee could see the carnival lights spinning behind him, smell the tang of funnel cake and stale beer, hear the faint screams of riders on the Ferris wheel. Her father's hand locked around Dwayne's wrist, her mother poised like a coil of razor wire. If one wrong move happened, a brawl might erupt right there in front of children and families. Then Dwayne jerked free, staggering back a step. He narrowed his eyes at Bill. "You'll regret that, old man." Morgan advanced half a step, fists curled. Kaylee grabbed her mother's arm, fear clawing at her chest. "Mom, please." "Not here." Dwayne and his friends retreated, but not before Snake Tattoo glared pointedly at Kaylee, mouthing words she couldn't quite decipher. Then they disappeared into the crowd, leaving tension in their wake. Bill rubbed his face, adrenaline coursing. "We need to tell the sheriff again." Morgan shook her head. "He won't do much without physical evidence or an assault." Her lips pressed thin. "But if they lay a finger on Kaylee..." She didn't finish the sentence, but Kaylee could guess the outcome. Morgan had faced real combat. A few bullies with questionable ranch ties were nothing compared to insurgents or trained fighters. But they were still a threat to Kaylee, and that alone was enough to provoke the mother bear in Morgan. Kaylee felt tears threaten, but she blinked them away. She was determined not to let fear rule her. "Let's just go back to the truck," she whispered. "I'm tired." Together, they left the carnival area, weaving past bright rides and sweaty crowds, stepping away from the swirling lights into the quieter stretch of the fairgrounds. As they neared their vehicle, Kaylee felt an unsettling chill in the evening air. She knew, deep down, that the worst was yet to come. Morgan opened the truck door for Kaylee, scanning the surroundings. "We'll keep watch tonight," she said, turning to Bill. "We'll sleep in shifts if we have to. No more surprises." Bill nodded grimly. "Agreed." Kaylee climbed into the back seat, hugging her knees to her chest. Through the windshield, she saw the faint outlines of the barns and the distant glow of the main arena's floodlights. She closed her eyes, exhaustion battling worry. The day had been a rush of triumph and tension, from winning second place to facing down Dwayne again. As the night grew deeper and the carnival lights finally dimmed, Kaylee listened to the soft murmur of her parent voices. She caught fragments, plans to confront, protect, speak to officials, keep Kaylee safe. Eventually, their conversation quieted. Kaylee drifted off into a restless sleep, still clutching the second-place ribbon. In her dreams, she raced barrels on shifting sands, while a snake slithered in the dust behind her. She heard Dwayne's taunting laughter echo from somewhere in the dark. And in the distance, her mother's voice repeated the same words. "Stay strong, Kaylee. Stay strong." The next morning, Kaylee woke to the soft glow of sunrise through the truck's windows. Morgan was sitting upright in the passenger seat, eyes bloodshot, a sure sign she'd been on watch most of the night. Bill was in the driver's seat, dozing, his hat pulled low. Kaylee stretched her stiff limbs, quietly slipping out of the truck. The fairgrounds were calm. A few early risers were already feeding their horses or refilling water buckets. She headed to Barn C to check on Aspen. The mare was resting, ears flicking as Kaylee approached. "Morning, girl," Kaylee said, offering a gentle pat. "We've only got one more day of events." Aspen blinked lazily, likely less interested in the competition than in her next meal. Kaylee smiled despite the lingering tension in her chest. Footsteps approached, and Kaylee glanced up to see Jess, the friendly ranch hand from earlier, carrying a water bucket. "Hey, Kaylee. Everything all right?" Kaylee forced a small grin. "Yeah, I'm good. Just checking on Aspen." Jess set down the bucket. He was a tall kid, broad-shouldered, wearing a beat-up straw cowboy hat. "Heard some rumors about folks messing with trailers last night." "You hear about that?" Kaylee sighed. "Ours got tagged. We tried to clean it up." Jess shook his head. "That's messed up. Let me know if you need anything." "I'm happy to help. Keep an eye on your stall." Kaylee felt a wave of relief at the simple kindness. "Thanks, Jess. I appreciate it." He nodded and continued tending to the horses. Kaylee left Barn C, her mind drifting back to the confrontation at the carnival. She decided to find her parents, hoping they'd slept a bit. Morgan was awake, leaning against the truck. When she saw Kaylee, she gave a weary smile. "Morning. Your dad's gone for coffee. You okay?" Kaylee kicked at the dusty ground. "I slept better than you, I think." Morgan grunted a laugh. "Probably. I kept watch. Didn't see those punks again, though." She paused, scanning the fairgrounds. "Let's get you some breakfast." They wandered to a row of food trucks that had just opened for the day. While Morgan sipped a black coffee, Kaylee nibbled on a breakfast burrito. The day's schedule listed more events, including a final roping round that Kaylee wasn't qualified for and a culminating show in the evening. Her official competitions were done, but she still wanted to watch and support her friends. Bill joined them, yawning, carrying an extra coffee for Morgan. "I talked to the sheriff's deputy on patrol. They haven't found those guys, but at least they know who to watch out for." Morgan sipped her coffee, frowning. "It's not enough." Kaylee placed a hand on her mother's arm. "We'll be okay, Mom." Morgan gave her a tight nod. "I just hate feeling powerless." They finished their breakfast in the shade of the food trucks. Kaylee exchanged a few words with other riders who passed by, congratulating each other on the previous day's events. She tried to savor the normalcy of rodeo life, ignoring the undercurrent of dread. Early afternoon found Kaylee and her parents wandering through the vendor area, picking up a couple of souvenirs. A leatherworker was stamping custom designs into belts, and Kaylee watched in fascination. Everything was vibrant and lively, until she caught sight of Dwayne near a stall that sold spurs and horse tack. He stood with snake tattoo and a shaved head friend, talking to a burly older man who exuded the same menacing aura. Could that be their boss or a relative? Kaylee turned away, hoping they hadn't noticed her. But the older man's voice carried across the bustle. "Cartwright," he said, spitting the name like poison. Kaylee tensed. Morgan sensed her daughter's reaction and followed her gaze. "Let's keep walking," she said, firm hand on Kaylee's shoulder. Bill nodded, guiding them away. Yet the old man's laughter echoed behind them, harsh and mocking. Kaylee's anxiety spiked. This situation was bigger than three punks. There was an entire network of bullies or criminals backing them up. By mid-afternoon, the final events were winding down. Kaylee and her parents decided to pack up the trailer early, hoping to leave as soon as possible and avoid further conflict. They approached Barn C to collect Aspen. The mare was calm, nibbling on hay. Kaylee led her out to the trailer, Morgan and Bill flanking her protectively. "Let's load up and go," Bill said, eyes sweeping the fairgrounds. "We'll skip the final show if we have to." Kaylee hated missing the finale, but the tension had eroded her excitement. She patted Aspen's side, guiding her up the ramp into the trailer. Morgan latched the door, double-checking each hinge. Bill began securing their gear in the truck bed. Just as they finished, a voice behind them drawled, "Leaving so soon?" Kaylee spun around to see Dwayne, arms crossed, standing a few paces away. His two buddies flanked him as usual. The older man from earlier, the burly figure who wore a stained work shirt, stood behind them, a twisted grin on his face. Morgan squared her shoulders. "That's right. We're leaving." Bill stepped in front of Kaylee. "Back off. We're not looking for trouble." Dwayne laughed, short and sharp. "See, my old man here doesn't like the Cartwright name too much." He jerked a thumb at the older man. "He's heard all about how high and mighty your family thinks it is. Owning prime land, winning rodeos." Bill's voice turned cold. "So what? That's no reason to harass a teenage girl." The older man, apparently Dwayne's father, stepped forward. "Reason enough. The Cartwrights always get the breaks in this county. Y'all got a sweet deal with a local feed supplier, a pipeline to the best auctions. Meanwhile, we're left scrounging." Morgan's eyes blazed. "That's not our doing. We pay our bills, we do our work. If you have a problem, take it up with the suppliers, not us. Now get out of our way." Dwayne's father chuckled, low and menacing. "Or what?" Morgan's stance shifted imperceptibly, like a fighter preparing for a strike. "You don't want to find out." One of the younger punks stepped forward, snarling, "Don't threaten us, lady." Kaylee's heart pounded. She glanced around, but the area was unusually deserted now that most folks were watching the final show in the main arena. Bill placed a steadying hand on Kaylee's arm, as if to silently say, "Keep calm." The older man spat near Morgan's boot. "These fairgrounds are not the place for a real settle-up. But your ranch might be. We know where you live, Cartwrights. Where your little girl sleeps." At that, Morgan's temper cracked. "What did you just say?" Her voice was ice, but Kaylee could practically see the hair-trigger fury behind her mother's eyes. Dwayne smirked. "Oh, come on, old man. Let's go. We'll have our fun some other time." Without further explanation, they turned and ambled off. Kaylee's heart pounded in her throat, rage and fear mixing in a nauseating swirl. She felt Bill's grip tighten on her arm. Morgan stood there, chest heaving, as though she was restraining herself from lunging at them. After a moment of tense silence, Bill cleared his throat. "We're leaving." "No." They piled into the truck. Morgan slid into the passenger seat with stiff movements, Kaylee in the back, eyes darting around for any sign of the group returning. Bill started the engine, and the truck pulled away from the fairgrounds, trailer rattling behind. For a while, no one spoke. The tension was palpable. Kaylee stared at the dusty road, her reflection in the side window. She saw fear in her own eyes, and it made her furious. She didn't want to be afraid. Eventually, Morgan spoke, voice tight. "I need to call my sister, see if she can come stay at the ranch for a while. We might need backup." Bill exhaled. "We can't turn the ranch into a fortress, Morgan. But maybe you're right. We should be cautious. Those guys are looking for a fight." Kaylee found her voice. "What if they really come after us?" Morgan turned halfway, meeting Kaylee's eyes with a solemn gaze. "Then we'll handle it." "No one's laying a hand on you, Kaylee." Kaylee nodded, trying to muster courage. Morgan was a trained Marine, more than capable in a fight. But these men were local, and they had numbers. Worse, they hinted at something bigger than a few punks, a vendetta. The truck rumbled along the highway, passing miles of desert and scrub. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in copper and gold. Eventually, the Cartwright Ranch appeared in the distance, a familiar silhouette against the endless expanse. Ordinarily, Kaylee felt comfort at the sight of home. Today, her stomach remained in knots. Bill steered the truck up the gravel drive and parked near the barn. A sense of relief washed over Kaylee at being home, but was tinged with dread. She hopped out, moving quickly to check on Aspen. The mare whinnied softly, happy to be back in her own stall. Morgan surveyed the property, her gaze lingering on the far fence line. "They threatened to come here," she murmured. "We need to be prepared." Bill's posture slumped. "I'll do a walkthrough, make sure everything's locked. We'll put Aspen in the secure stall." Kaylee listened to them strategize. Usually, coming home from a rodeo meant rehashing the day's highlights, celebrating wins, and promising to do better next time. Now it felt more like they were battening down the hatches against a looming storm. Night fell on the ranch with a quiet that felt ominous rather than peaceful. They secured the animals, checked the perimeter fences. Morgan rummaged in the old bunkhouse and emerged with her personal firearm, legally owned, kept locked away unless needed. The sight of her mother holding that weapon made Kaylee's throat tighten, but a cold sense of reassurance also rose within her. Morgan approached Kaylee, setting a hand on her shoulder. "I don't want to scare you," she said softly, "but I know what intimidation looks like. These men are trying to make us cower. If we stand firm, they might back off. And if they don't?" Kaylee asked, voice quivering. Morgan's gaze hardened. "Then they'll regret crossing me." Kaylee said nothing more, just nodded. Bill ushered them inside the house, locking the door behind them. He moved to the phone on the wall. "I'm calling the sheriff again, letting him know what happened. If these guys so much as set foot on our property, we'll have a patrol car out here." But Kaylee knew response times could be slow. And if Dwayne's father had enough sway or cunning, it might all be brushed off as neighborly disputes. She exhaled shakily, heading to her bedroom while Morgan and Bill made their calls. Sitting on her bed, Kaylee turned the second-place ribbon in her hands. It should have been a symbol of triumph. Now it felt tainted by the memory of fear and confrontation. She set it gently on her dresser, then changed into pajamas, forcing herself to calm down. Outside her window, the ranch spread out under the moonlight, and she remembered nights when all she heard was the soft lowing of cattle and the rustle of desert wind. Tonight, every sound felt amplified. The squeak of a gate hinge, the thump of a loose shutter. She jumped at each noise. A shadow passed near the barn, but it was just Bill. He turned on the floodlights that illuminated the yard, bright enough to cast stark silhouettes across the ground. Morgan stood on the porch, her form outlined by the glow, scanning the darkness. Kaylee gulped. Her mother looked every bit the soldier she once was, vigilant, unyielding. While it comforted Kaylee, it also underscored the severity of the situation. She lay back on her bed, heart still hammering, trying to find the will to sleep. The minutes dragged into hours, and Kaylee dozed fitfully, expecting at any moment the roar of a truck engine, the flash of headlights, the echo of distant gunshots. But nothing happened. Midnight came and went with only the quiet hum of the ranch. Eventually, Kaylee slipped into a deeper sleep, half convinced that maybe Dwayne and his father had decided to move on, that their words were empty threats. She dreamed again, though this time the nightmares were sharper, featuring the older man's cruel grin and the scrawled message, "Get lost, princess," dancing across the walls. In the darkness, one thought kept replaying in her mind. This is my home. I won't be run off my land. Little did she know, the real test of that resolve was closer than she dared to imagine. Several nights passed in wary quiet. Kaylee resumed her usual ranch chores, feeding the animals, fixing a loose fence post here and there, practicing riding with Aspen in the early mornings. Her parents took turns keeping watch, but no intruders materialized. The tension in the house slowly ratcheted down. Kaylee's father joked that maybe Dwayne's father was all bark and no bite. Still, Morgan remained on edge. Kaylee caught her mother regularly scanning the horizon, checking the road, meticulously inspecting footprints in the dust around the barn. She kept her firearm within easy reach, an unspoken warning that any threat would be met with force. On the fourth night after the rodeo, Kaylee helped her father prepare the horses for bed, brushing them down, laying fresh bedding. The sun sank below the rolling hills, igniting the sky in a brilliant wash of orange and pink. "You did good at that rodeo," Bill told her quietly, patting Aspen's side. "Don't let those punks take that from you." Kaylee nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thanks, Dad. I'm proud of what I did. She paused, setting the brush aside. "I just wish it hadn't ended on such a sour note." Bill's face softened. "We'll deal with them if they show up again. You focus on your future. There'll be more rodeos, more ribbons." Kaylee gave Aspen a final pat before following her father out of the barn. Inside the house, Morgan had set a small dinner on the table. Simple stew and bread, enough to fill them up after a long day's work. They ate in relative silence, the conversation turning to ranch finances, talk of next season's hay supply, and whether they might expand the goat pen. Kaylee normally found these discussions mundane, but now they felt oddly reassuring, a sign of stability amid chaos. After dinner, Kaylee washed dishes while Morgan stepped onto the porch, scanning the twilight. Bill joined her, and Kaylee heard them talking in hushed tones. Something about calling Morgan's sister, double-checking if she could come for a visit. Kaylee wiped her hands and poked her head out the door. "You guys want me to take first watch tonight?" She tried to keep her tone light, but inside she felt the burden pressing on them all. Morgan glanced at Bill, then back to Kaylee. "You're still a kid, Kaylee. We appreciate your help, but you need your rest." "I'm almost 17, Kaylee countered, but didn't push it further. "Just wake me if anything happens." She headed to her room, changed into pajamas, and climbed into bed. The events of the last few weeks replayed in her mind, how one moment she was celebrating a rodeo triumph, and the next she was living under the threat of violence. Eventually, exhaustion took her, and she slipped into a dreamless sleep. She woke to a muffled shout. Disoriented, she scrambled out of bed. The clock read 2:13 a.m., heart pounding. Kaylee threw on a hoodie over her pajamas and raced into the hallway. Morgan stood at the front window, shotgun in hand, scanning the yard. Bill was right beside her, holding a flashlight. Kaylee caught sight of flickering orange light through the window. "What's going on?" Kaylee demanded. "There's a fire," Morgan said urgently. "Near the barn." Kaylee's stomach dropped. Without hesitation, she followed her parents onto the porch. A small blaze licked at the side of the barn, near a stack of old timbers. Smoke billowed into the night sky. "We have to get the horses out," Kaylee cried, horror gripping her. Morgan nodded, handing the flashlight to Kaylee. Go with your dad and do that. I'll cover you. She chambered around in the shotgun, scanning the darkness for any sign of trespassers. Bill dashed toward the barn, Kaylee on his heels. She could feel the heat of the flames before they even reached the building. Inside, the horses were panicking, stamping, and whinnying. Smoke seeped in through the boards. Bill began opening stall doors, calling to each horse, coaxing them outside. Kaylee coughed on the thickening air as she rushed to Aspen's stall. The mare's eyes were wide with terror, flanks quivering. It's okay, girl, Kaylee soothed, throwing a lead rope around Aspen's neck. She tugged gently, guiding the horse out of the stall. A fresh wave of smoke rolled in, and Kaylee coughed violently. Bill's voice echoed across the barn. Get them out, Kaylee. Go. She led Aspen out into the yard, away from the flames, hooking her to a fence post well clear of danger. The other horses milled about, still spooked, but at least they were out of the barn. Kaylee spotted Morgan, shotgun at the ready, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glow of the fire. Any sign of them? Kaylee shouted, over the crackle of flames and the frantic whinnying of the horses. Morgan shook her head, gaze unwavering. Not yet. Bill burst out of the barn with another horse, coughing hard. He stumbled and Kaylee ran to help steady him. We need to get water on that fire, he gasped, leaning on her shoulder. Morgan shouted, I've got the well pump turned on. Grab the hoses. Kaylee and Bill scrambled for the garden hoses coiled near the barn. They unfurled them, but the water pressure was weak, barely enough to douse the flames licking up the barn wall. The timbers along the side were starting to catch. The acrid smoke burned Kaylee's nostrils. Morgan joined them, scanning the horizon even as she helped direct the hose spray. Her voice was tight. This was arson. Someone lit this. Bill cursed under his breath. We can't let it spread. Kaylee, call 911. She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking, and dialed. The operator's voice crackled. Kaylee gave a rushed explanation, rattling off their address and describing the fire. Please hurry, she pleaded. As they fought the flames, the nighttime air rang with frantic effort, shouted instructions, the hiss of water, the crackle of burning wood. Flames danced ominously against the barn's side. If it spread to the roof, the entire structure could be lost. Finally, the headlights of the volunteer fire truck appeared on the dusty road. 3 local firefighters jumped out, unraveling larger hoses with better water pressure. Morgan pointed out the section of the barn that was ablaze. Within minutes, the combined effort had the fire under control, though the smoke still billowed. Kaylee coughed, wiping her teary eyes. She turned to see Bill's face streaked with soot, Morgan's hair disheveled and damp from the spray. The barn smoldered, its sides scorched black. The damage could have been far worse if they hadn't reacted quickly. As the adrenaline began to wane, Kaylee felt a tremble in her knees. This was the line. Dwayne and his father, she had no doubt they were responsible, had escalated from threats to direct action. They brought the fight to her doorstep. A firefighter approached them, removing his helmet. We've contained it. Any idea how this started? Morgan shared a glance with Bill, then answered, We suspect arson. We've had some trouble recently with a group of men. The firefighter nodded. Sheriff's on the way. Give him the details. Kaylee stood by Aspen, stroking the mare's trembling flank. She felt a surge of gratitude that none of the animals had been harmed, but a simmering rage also boiled in her gut. How dare they do this to her family? Minutes later, a patrol car arrived, lights flashing. The same deputy from the rodeo stepped out, stifling a yawn. He surveyed the damage with a low whistle. You folks sure it's the same men from the fairgrounds? Morgan's voice shook with anger. Yes, Dwayne and his father. We had repeated threats. And now this. The deputy nodded, scribbling in a notepad. We'll open an investigation. Gather what evidence we can. Did you see them? Any witnesses? Bill, gritted his teeth. No. But who else would do this? The deputy sighed. I understand, Mr. Cartwright, but you know the law. We need concrete evidence. Morgan's frustration boiled over. Concrete evidence? They threatened us, then our barn is set on fire a few days later. That's evidence enough. The deputy held up his hands, placating. I get it, ma'am, but I can't arrest someone based on suspicion alone. We'll do a thorough investigation. If something points to them, we'll bring them in. Morgan's grip on the shotgun tightened. For a moment, Kaylee thought her mother might unleash a string of curses or worse. But Bill placed a hand on Morgan's shoulder, calming her. The deputy took a few more statements and pictures of the charred barn wall. The firefighters wrapped up, confirming that the rest of the structure was safe for the night. They advised the Cartwrights to keep a watchful eye in case any embers reignited. By the time the emergency vehicles rumbled away, the sky was brightening with the first hues of dawn. Kaylee's adrenaline was spent, leaving her shaky and exhausted. The horses huddled in a corner of the corral, unsettled. Morgan set her shotgun down on a hay bale, exhaling a trembling breath. They came onto our land. They could have killed our horses, burned our ranch down. Bill nodded grimly. We'll repair the barn. But we need a plan. If they're bold enough to do this, what's next? Kaylee's voice was soft but resolute. We can't let them terrorize us. This is our home. Morgan straightened her back, turning to Kaylee and Bill with fierce determination in her eyes. They want to bring the fight here? Fine. We'll be ready. They have no idea who they're messing with. The sky shifted from gray to a pale wash of orange. Sunlight edged over the horizon, illuminating the charred, wet timbers of the barn. For Kaylee, that sunrise felt like a warning and a promise, a signal that the next chapter of this conflict was about to begin in earnest. That morning, the Cartwright family convened around the kitchen table, battered and smoky from the night's events but united in resolve. Bill set a steaming mug of coffee before Morgan and one of hot chocolate for Kaylee. They all looked exhausted, but there was a new fire in their eyes. Morgan cleared her throat, pointing to a rough sketch of their property laid out on the table. We'll set up some motion sensor lights around the barn. Maybe even install a couple of cameras. Bill nodded, running a hand through his messy hair. I'll talk to Earl in town about renting or buying some. He's got those hunting cameras we can adapt. Kaylee leaned forward. And what about the fences? Morgan tapped the map. We'll do a perimeter check every morning and evening. You and I can start with the north side after breakfast. Bill, you call Earl and see about the cameras. They agreed on the plan. No one said it, but Kaylee knew they were essentially fortifying the ranch. Dwayne and his father had escalated to violence. They'd proven they had no scruples about endangering animals or property. The Cartwrights had to be ready. After a quick breakfast, Morgan and Kaylee set out with a toolbox and a handful of extra fence posts. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the desert brush. Kaylee's body ached from the stress of the night, but she pushed through it, focusing on the simple, repetitive task of walking the fence line, checking for damage or signs of tampering. Morgan occasionally stopped to point out scuffed tire tracks or footprints in the dirt near the fence. Hard to say how old these are, she remarked, snapping a photo with her phone for documentation. But we can't ignore anything. Kaylee's gut clenched each time they found potential evidence of intrusion. The dryness of the desert made tracks last longer than in wetter climates, but it was still unnerving to see how close outsiders may have come. They spent hours out there, eventually looping back to the barn. Bill greeted them, holding a small box. Got 4 trail cams from Earl, he said, lifting one. Battery-powered, motion-activated. We can set them up around the barn, near the house, and at the main gate. Morgan nodded approval. Let's do it. We catch any movement at night, we'll have proof. Kaylee grabbed one of the cameras, reading the instructions. It stores the videos on an SD card. We'll have to check them every morning. They split up. Kaylee helped Bill affix one camera to a post overlooking the barn entrance, camouflaging it with some brush to avoid easy detection. Morgan set up another near the main driveway gate, also hidden. By late afternoon, they had all 4 cameras placed strategically. The ranch felt quiet tense. Kaylee glanced frequently at the main road, half expecting to see a battered truck rolling up in broad daylight. But it never came. They reconvened in the living room, sweat-soaked and tired. Bill turned on the radio, hoping for local news. Static crackled, then a country station came through. After a few minutes, an announcer mentioned the recent string of vandalism and property damage in the county, urging ranchers to take precautions. No names were given, but Kaylee's stomach churned at the vague references. Morgan paced, restless. "I want to do a few self-defense drills out back," she said. "I need to burn off some energy. Kaylee, care to join me?" Kaylee nodded, eager to channel her own anxiety into something productive. They stepped into the backyard, and Morgan began instructing Kaylee on basic hand-to-hand maneuvers. She showed her how to break holds, how to throw a quick elbow or knee if someone grabbed her. "This is last resort stuff," Morgan emphasized, blocking an imaginary strike. "I'm hoping we never need it. But if you're cornered, you fight like hell." Kaylee listened intently, mimicking her mother's stances. She'd never been in a real fight, aside from the small scuffles with Dwayne's group at the rodeo. But she could see the raw intensity in her mother's eyes, the practiced fluidity of her movements. Morgan might be out of active service, but the Marine training was bone deep. After half an hour, they paused, panting. Morgan placed a hand on Kaylee's shoulder. "You're a strong kid. Remember that." Kaylee nodded, chest heaving. "I will." They went back inside as dusk approached. Bill had grilled some burgers for dinner, and the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table again. It felt almost like normal family life, except for the undercurrent of fear. They turned in early, each one feeling the weight of the day. Kaylee once more struggled to sleep, staring at her ceiling fan as it spun. The memory of the barn fire haunted her. She was acutely aware that, at any moment, something worse could happen. A break-in, a direct confrontation. Eventually, exhaustion won out. She drifted off, only to be awakened again sometime after midnight by a shrill beep. Kaylee bolted upright, heart pounding. The beep repeated, urgent. She scrambled out of bed, meeting Morgan and Bill in the hallway. "Motion sensor alarm," Morgan said tensely. "Out by the barn." Bill grabbed a flashlight and a rifle from the closet. Morgan reached for her shotgun. Kaylee swallowed, adrenaline spiking. "Stay behind us," Bill said as they rushed out the door. The night air was still, the moon high. The floodlights they'd installed near the barn flickered, indicating movement had been detected. Kaylee's pulse hammered in her ears. They rounded the corner of the barn, scanning the darkness. Nothing. A faint rustling near the fence line caught their attention. Bill aimed the flashlight, revealing only a tumbleweed rolling in the wind. Morgan cursed under her breath, eyes sweeping the area. Could be an animal. Kaylee exhaled shakily. False alarm. Just then, the motion sensor beeped again. This time, the floodlight on the far side of the barn lit up. Morgan and Bill sprinted toward it, Kaylee following. They found the main gate closed, no sign of a vehicle. The desert stretched on silent. Bill lowered his rifle, baffled. "There's nobody." Before he finished, a crack of gunfire shattered the night. Kaylee screamed and dove to the ground. Morgan and Bill dropped as well. A bullet pinged off the barn's metal siding with a sharp clang. "Get down," Morgan shouted, crawling to Kaylee's side. "Are you hit?" Kaylee shook her head, heart in her throat. She was trembling all over. Another shot rang out, sparks flying off the gravel near them. Bill fumbled for his rifle. "We're pinned." Morgan's jaw set. "We can crawl behind the tractor for cover." "Kaylee, follow me." "Bill, provide cover fire." They scrambled. Bill popped up momentarily, firing a shot into the darkness. The muzzle flash lit his face in a terrifying instant. Kaylee crawled after Morgan, stones scraping her knees. Her lungs felt ready to burst from holding back screams. They crouched behind the tractor's large rear tire. Bill slid in behind them, rifle ready, scanning the dark horizon. The floodlights gave them limited visibility, but beyond their range, the night cloaked whoever was firing. Morgan's voice was calm but urgent. "We can't stay here. We need to get inside and call the sheriff." Bill nodded, chest heaving. "We'll move in 3. I'll lay down suppressing fire." The plan was set. On Bill's count, he rose to fire several shots into the darkness, hoping to scare off or at least slow their attackers. Morgan grabbed Kaylee's arm, pulling her toward the house at a crouched run. Kaylee's heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst. Shots whizzed overhead, one splintering a wooden fence post near them. They made it to the porch. Morgan shoved Kaylee inside and spun around, aiming her shotgun. She fired once, the thunderous boom echoing across the yard. Suddenly, the gunfire from the attackers ceased. The night swallowed their presence, leaving only the echo of the shot and the ring of Kaylee's own heartbeat in her ears. Bill barreled in next, slamming the door shut. Morgan locked it, sliding the deadbolt. Kaylee collapsed against the wall, adrenaline surging. Bill grabbed the landline phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. Morgan pressed her back against the door, breathing in ragged gasps. "They're gone for now," she panted. "But they might circle back." Kaylee trembled, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "They're really trying to kill us." Morgan met her gaze, face grim. "They want to scare us off or worse. But we're not leaving." Bill told the dispatcher their situation, requesting immediate help. Kaylee caught snippets of the conversation. "Shots fired. We returned fire. Yes, we have every right to defend our property." She heard the same line from the deputy. "We'll send units as soon as possible." Morgan clenched her jaw. They might be long gone by then. Kaylee's legs gave out, and she slid to the floor. A wave of numbness washed over her. This was no longer a series of petty harassments. It was an outright assault. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to quell the shaking. Morgan knelt beside her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Stay with me, Kaylee," she said gently. "Breathe." Kaylee inhaled, focusing on her mother's voice, on the memory of how strong Morgan had always been. She pictured Morgan in her Marine fatigues, unwavering in the face of danger. If her mother could be that strong, maybe Kaylee could too. Eventually, she found her voice. "I'm okay. Just terrified." Morgan helped her to her feet. "We all are, but we'll get through it." Within half an hour, 2 sheriff's vehicles arrived, lights flashing. Deputies searched the property with flashlights and found fresh tire tracks near the fence line. Kaylee's heart twisted with vindication. Finally, tangible proof. But that did little to soothe her fear. "You said you recognized them from the rodeo?" a deputy asked. Morgan folded her arms. "We didn't see them tonight, but we know who's behind this. Dwayne, his father, or their associates." The deputy jotted notes. "We'll look into it. In the meantime, might be best if you stay somewhere else for a while. A motel in town, maybe." Bill shook his head. "This is our home. We're not abandoning it." Morgan's eyes blazed. "I'm not running. Neither is Kaylee." The deputy sighed. "Well, we'll have patrols pass by more often. But you might want to think about hiring private security or something. This is serious." Kaylee glanced at her parents, seeing their determination solidify. They would stand their ground. So would she. By the time the deputies left, dawn was breaking again. The second night in a row with no rest. Kaylee's entire body felt drained, her mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and stubborn resolve. Morgan set her shotgun on the kitchen table. "All right," she said, voice deadly calm. "They've declared war on us. They're not going to stop. If the law won't protect us, then we protect ourselves. Bill exhaled. I'll call the insurance about the barn and see about reinforcing the doors. Maybe put up some extra lighting. Kaylee looked at her mother. And me? Morgan's gaze softened. You're going to keep living, Kaylee. Ride your horse, do your chores, finish your schoolwork. But from now on, you're never alone outside. Understand? Kaylee nodded, throat tight. She understood perfectly. The ranch was now a battleground, and they had to be ready for the next attack, whenever it might come, whatever form it might take. For the next 2 days, the Cartwright Ranch braced for a siege that didn't immediately come. Morgan installed additional locks and reinforced window latches. Bill purchased heavy-duty floodlights, making the yard glow brighter than ever at night. Kaylee jumped at every passing car, but none of them were the battered pickup belonging to Dwayne and his father. On the 3rd night, Kaylee was in her room, finishing up some reading for school. Morgan had insisted that Kaylee not neglect her studies, threat or no threat. Still, Kaylee found it impossible to focus. Every creak and rustle outside set her nerves on edge. Suddenly, Morgan's shout rang through the house. Kaylee sprang to her feet, heart hammering. She raced to the living room, where her parents were peering at the monitor hooked up to the newly placed security cameras. On screen, a pair of headlights flickered at the far edge of the property, near the fence line. It's them, Morgan hissed. That's definitely a truck. Bill grabbed his rifle. Call the sheriff? Morgan's jaw tightened. We can, but last time they barely made it in time. We should warn them anyway. Kaylee dialed 911, voice shaking as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. Meanwhile, Bill and Morgan stepped onto the porch, rifles at the ready. Kaylee followed, phone still in hand. In the distance, dust kicked up under the beams of headlights. The truck roared closer, then stopped abruptly outside the front gate. Kaylee could make out multiple silhouettes inside. Fear clenched her stomach, but she swallowed and tried to stand tall. One of the passenger doors opened, and a figure stepped out. Even with the floodlights, it was hard to see details. But a voice called across the gate. Cartwrights, come on out and say hello. Morgan's grip on her rifle tightened. Stay back, she shouted. We're armed, and this is private property. A mocking laugh echoed in the night. Kaylee recognized it, Dwayne. We're not scared of your guns, lady. Behind him, another figure emerged, likely his father. Let's talk, Bill, the older man called. No reason for bloodshed. Bill exchanged a glance with Morgan, then shouted back, You shot us last time. You set our barn on fire. You think we're here to talk? Silence. A breeze stirred the dust. Kaylee's pulse roared in her ears. She thought she heard a faint chuckle, then Dwayne's voice again. We gave you warnings. You ignoring, it means you've chosen war. Morgan exhaled sharply. We're not the ones who want war. But we'll finish it if we have to. Another door slammed from the truck. It sounded like more men stepping out. Kaylee's blood ran cold. She strained to see how many, but darkness cloaked them beyond the glare of the headlights. Her mother edged closer to Kaylee. Go inside, she whispered. Kaylee shook her head, gripping her phone, still on the line with the dispatcher. Sheriff's on the way, she said into the phone. Please hurry, she repeated. Dwayne's father spoke again. You can call every cop in the county. By the time they get here, we'll have settled this. Bill shouted, You're insane. You really want to die over this grudge? It's not about dying, Bill. It's about respect. You took the best deals, the best feed, got all the breaks. Now you'll learn what it's like on the other side. Kaylee's heart hammered. She saw movement near the fence, someone fiddling with the chain that kept the gate closed. A loud clang indicated they were trying to break it open. Morgan's voice went razor sharp. Stop. Step away from the gate, or I will fire. Another mocking laugh. Then a squeal of metal as the chain snapped. The gate swung open. Bill leveled his rifle. "This is your last warning." The night held its breath. Kaylee's hand shook, phone slipping from her grip. She caught it at the last second, pressing it back to her ear. "They've broken into our property," she whispered to the dispatcher, who told her to remain calm and stay on the line. Dwayne's father made the first move, stepping onto the ranch. Lights from the truck illuminated his figure, thick-bodied, a mean sneer etched on his face. Dwayne and at least 2 other men followed, each brandishing a weapon. Kaylee's vision narrowed with terror. Morgan fired a warning shot into the air. "You step another foot, you'll be riddled with bullets. I guarantee it." Dwayne's father paused, grinned, twisting. "Go ahead, shoot. Let's see who's better at this game." Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunshots roared from both sides. Bill and Morgan dove behind a low wall, returning fire in short bursts. Kaylee, wide-eyed, crouched on a porch, phone clutched in numb fingers. The men advanced slowly, using the truck as partial cover. Sparks flew as bullets hit the porch railing, the gravel, the side of the house. Bill shouted over the gunfire, "Kaylee, get down." She dropped flat, heart thundering. She heard her mother's rifle crack, saw muzzle flash from Dwayne's father's position. Suddenly, a bullet shattered a porch light overhead, raining glass shards. Kaylee threw her arms over her head. The dispatcher's voice squawked urgently. "Units are en route. Stay down. Do not engage if you can escape." Escape? This was her home. Where could she run? Another round whizzed past, slamming into the porch step. Kaylee crawled to the corner of the house, pressing herself against the siding. Morgan crouched beside her. "You all right?" Kaylee nodded shakily, tears stinging her eyes. "Mom, this is insane." Morgan's face was a mask of determination. "I'm ending this now." She peeked out, assessing the attackers. Bill fired from the other side of the low wall, yelling curses at them. Kaylee caught a glimpse of Dwayne's father stepping out from behind a truck, pistol raised. Morgan took a steadying breath. "Cover me," she hissed. Then she moved, rolling into a prone position at the corner of the yard. Kaylee watched in awe as her mother focused, ex-Marine instincts kicking in. Morgan's rifle barked twice. Dwayne's father cried out, stumbling. He fell to one knee, clutching his shoulder. Dwayne yelled, "Pa," and darted forward, firing wildly. One bullet hit the ground near Morgan, kicking up dust. Morgan fired again, forcing Dwayne to dive behind the truck. Adrenaline hammered through Kaylee. She grabbed the phone again, hearing the dispatcher say something about being 5 minutes out. It felt like a lifetime. Bill shouted, "I'm out," meaning he was out of ammo. He ducked, fumbling for extra rounds. Morgan yelled, "I've got 3 left, may him count." Kaylee's vision blurred with terror, but a surge of protectiveness rose in her. She couldn't just hide while her parents fought. She spotted Bill's ammunition box on the porch. Gritting her teeth, she crawled across the wooden boards, gunfire ringing in her ears, shattered glass scraping her palms. She grabbed the box, flinging it toward Bill. He snatched it with a nod of thanks, quickly reloading. The onslaught continued, shots from the truck, returned by Bill and Morgan from behind cover. One of the attackers howled, possibly hit. Dwayne's voice roared in fury. Then Kaylee heard distant sirens. Flashes of red and blue flickered against the desert backdrop. The cavalry was coming. She prayed it wasn't too late. "Sheriff's here," Kaylee called out. "Mom, Dad, hold on." Dwayne's father struggled to stand, cursing at the new arrivals. The men retreated toward the truck, but Morgan seized the opportunity. She rose to one knee, lined up her shot, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit one of the rear tires, blowing it out with a loud pop. The truck lurched. Dwayne and the other men cursed, scrambling. Police cruisers skidded into view, lights strobing. Deputies spilled out, weapons drawn, shouting orders, "Drop your weapons." Hands in the air. Caught between a house and the newly arrived deputies, Dwayne and his father froze. Another man tried to run, but was tackled by a deputy. In the confusion, Bill and Morgan stepped out, guns still raised but pointed skyward to show the deputies they weren't a threat. Kaylee stood shakily, tears streaming down her face. It was over. The men who had been terrorizing them were cornered. Dwayne's father bellowed defiance, but with his shoulder bleeding and the truck immobilized, he had nowhere to go. Deputies rushed him, forcing him to the ground. Dwayne dropped his weapon, cursing, while a deputy locked cuffs around his wrists. Amid the swirl of red and blue lights, Kaylee felt her knees buckle. Morgan rushed to catch her. Bill was at her side in an instant, rifle clattering to the ground as he pulled Kaylee into a protective embrace. "You're safe," he whispered, voice choked. "It's over." Morgan's gaze swept the yard, making sure all threats were neutralized, before dropping to her knees beside Kaylee, hugging both her and Bill. Deputies swarmed the property, reading the men their rights, collecting discarded guns. An ambulance rolled up, its lights adding to the chaos, medics ready to treat the wounded. Kaylee clung to her parents, adrenaline finally giving way to sobs of relief and shock. She could hardly believe they'd survived this nightmare. Morgan pressed her forehead to Kaylee's. "I told you no one was laying a hand on you." "Not while I'm around." Kaylee nodded, unable to speak, tears mingling with dust on her cheeks. She looked at the scene around them, police, medics, shattered porch light, bullet holes in the siding, and felt a profound gratitude that none of them were lying on the ground in a pool of blood. It could have ended so differently. As the deputies gathered statements, Kaylee watched them haul Dwayne and his father into the back of a patrol car. Dwayne's eyes searched the yard, landing on Kaylee. He sneered through the window, but this time Kaylee didn't flinch. There was no power left in that glare, no intimidation that could break her anymore. She knew she had faced real danger and come out stronger. Bill escorted Kaylee inside, while Morgan remained to finalize details with the sheriff. Kaylee sank onto the couch, head spinning. Bill brought her water, gently pressing the glass into her shaking hands. When Morgan finally came in, she set her rifle aside carefully and locked the door behind her. She sat on the couch next to Kaylee, pulling her close. "They're all in custody," Morgan murmured. "We're free." Kaylee exhaled, the knot in her chest easing for the first time in days. "I can't believe it's finally over." Bill nodded, exhaustion etched into his features. "It is. And you two were so brave." Morgan looked at Kaylee, pride shining in her tear-filled eyes. "A Marine and a rancher's daughter. Nobody pushes us around." Kaylee managed a shaky laugh, then let her head rest on her mother's shoulder. In that moment, the tension, fear, and anger that had consumed them melted into a simple, overwhelming relief. The ranch was still standing, they were alive, and their enemies were in handcuffs. There would be a long road to repair the damage, physical and emotional, but they would walk it together. Outside, dawn's light crept over the horizon once more, illuminating the battered ranch house and the bullet-riddled yard. But it felt like a new beginning. Kaylee closed her eyes, letting her parents' warmth steady her, determined to hold on to hope for the future. A week later, Kaylee rose with the sun, her bruises and cuts mostly healed. The ranch bore fresh scars, charred siding on the barn, a shattered porch light, bullet holes in the fence. But with each day, the land felt safer, quieter. Dwayne, his father, and their accomplices were behind bars, charged with arson, assault with a deadly weapon, and trespassing. The sheriff's office, once slow, was now diligent in building the case against them. Kaylee stepped onto the porch, inhaling the cool morning air. In the dawn light, she saw her mother cleaning one of the rifles on a makeshift workbench. Morgan looked up and smiled. "Morning." "Morning," Kaylee replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "Dad's still sleeping." Morgan nodded. "He deserves it." He spent half the night patching the fence. They stood in companionable silence. The ranch was battered, but not broken. Each day they repaired something new, a fence post, a barn plank, or just their own sense of peace. Kaylee occasionally caught herself jolting at loud noises or scanning the road for suspicious trucks. But she knew that chapter was closed. The men who tried to run them off had failed. When Kaylee stepped into the barn, she found Aspen dozing in her stall. The mare perked up at her approach. Kaylee rubbed her muzzle affectionately. "Hey, girl. Ready for a ride?" She saddled Aspen, guiding her out into the corral. The sun climbed higher, gilding the horizon in soft gold. Kaylee mounted up, feeling the comforting sway of the horse beneath her. She nudged Aspen into an easy trot, circling the corral. Her mind drifted to the rodeo, her second-place ribbon, the sense of pride before everything spiraled. But she refused to let the violence overshadow her achievement. She planned to attend more rodeos, keep chasing her dreams. She'd train harder, push herself and Aspen to new heights. And when she won first place, she'd hold that ribbon with the same unwavering resolve she'd shown against those thugs. After a few circuits, Kaylee dismounted and led Aspen back to the barn. Morgan approached, wiping her hands on a rag. "Thinking about the next rodeo?" she asked, reading Kaylee's expression. Kaylee nodded. "Yeah, I want to compete again, as soon as possible." Morgan's eyes glowed with approval. "Good. We face our fears by running straight toward them." The silence passed, filled with unspoken memories of gunshots, flames, and midnight terror. Then Kaylee exhaled. "Mom, thank you. For everything. For protecting me." Morgan pressed a gentle hand to Kaylee's cheek. "It's my job. One I'll never stop doing." They walked side by side toward the house, the morning light unveiling a ranch still standing tall despite its scars. Bill poked his head out the door, yawning, hair tousled. "Coffee's on," he called. Kaylee laughed. It was a simple moment, but it felt like a treasure. The threat was gone. Their home was theirs once more. And as the Cartwright family settled down to breakfast, the sun rose fully above the horizon, casting warm rays across the dusty yard. A new day had begun, one of hope, healing, and the promise of future rodeos where Kaylee would show the world what a rancher's daughter, guided by the fierce spirit of a Marine mother, could truly accomplish. They had faced the darkest of nights, but dawn had come, and with it a certainty. Together, they could withstand any storm.